So hello everyone and welcome to our fourth Panoramas Roundtable discussion of the fall 2020 semester. My name is Kaylin and I'm the Panoramas coordinator for this school year. For those of you who don't know, Panoramas is an online student-led publication dedicated to news research, culture, and art of Latin America, the Caribbean, and Latinx and Caribbean diasporas. We'll be hosting roundtable discussions around every other week, and these will be led by our student interns, mostly working on their own research for Panoramas. For a full calendar of our upcoming roundtables, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter. And I will put our handles and link for our newsletter in the chat as well. Today, Isabel will be discussing her article, The Venezuelan Migrant and Refugee Crisis, Bringing Attention to the Displaced. Isabel is an international student from Colombia. At Pitt, she is currently a sophomore majoring in economics with a minor in French and a certificate in Latin American studies. As a Panoramas intern, Isabel hopes to promote the region and continue exploring areas of interest such as politics, development, and human rights. While Isabel is presenting and during the discussion, feel free to use the chat feature for any comments and questions. And if you have, if you would use the raise hand feature during the discussion, which you can find under participants on the bottom of your Zoom screen, that would be wonderful to help us let the discussion flow. And I will put the link to Isabel's article in the chat as well for your reference. I think that is all. Isabel, would you like to take it away?
So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Kaylin said, today I will be talking about the Venezuelan migrant and refugee crisis, specifically bringing attention to the displaced or to these refugees who are really, the victims of this crisis. So first of all, I just wanted to share this image with all of you. It was an image taken by Julian Lineros, who is a colleague of my dad's who traveled to the Venezuelan-Colombian border. And it obviously shows Venezuelan migrants crossing into Colombia through Cucuta, which is in the northeastern region of the country. And I just wanted to share this because I think it has a lot of impact. And, it tells you a lot about the situation that these people are in. So most of these migrants are traveling on foot, and they're not only traveling to neighboring countries like Colombia and Brazil, but they're also traveling to countries that are further away, like Peru, Ecuador, and Chile. So even to get to like relatively close cities, like Bogota in Colombia, it can take weeks from the border. So you really ask yourself, how long is it taking these refugees to get to countries that are further away? And it's also very important to keep in mind that they're not only traveling on foot, but they're traveling under horrible conditions where a lot of them don't have, money to pay for food or shelter. And essentially they're traveling through the mountains, which is a very dangerous journey overall, and they can encounter violence on the way. So unlike other refugee crises, the one in Venezuela is not due to conventional war or conflict, but the conditions that people are under are not too different from those in an active war zone. So I kind of talked about this before, but where are they going? So around 4.2 million Venezuelan refugees and migrants have left Venezuela, and that's about 12% of the Venezuelan population. Colombia, with a population of 50 million, has received 1.8 million refugees and migrants, so they now compose around 3% of the population. So that makes Colombia the country that is hosting the most amount of migrants currently. And then other countries that are hosting migrants just include Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and Brazil. And of course, there are other countries like the US, but these are just countries that are hosting plenty of them or a large share of them. So because of these statistics and these large numbers, the Venezuelan humanitarian crisis is becoming one of the worst humanitarian crises the hemisphere has ever seen. So just a panorama of Venezuela or the situation in the country right now. There's a lot of violence caused by a power struggle between President Maduro and the opposition, and there are human rights violations that are being carried out on the daily. So this year, the UN implicated President Maduro and other high-ranking officials with to systematic human rights abuses. which included tortures and killings, and they're mainly to silence the opposition. And there's a huge economic crisis. The economy has contracted by 65%, which is the largest contraction outside of war in 45 years. The average income is about 72 US cents per day, which has caused more than 64.8% of households to experience multidimensional poverty. And because there's so much hyperinflation, they experience constant food shortages and hunger. So a lot of them, have to stand in lines outside of supermarkets for hours just to get a small amount of food or basic necessities. And of course, there's a collapsing public health system, which leaves a lot of people without access to medicine. And that's specifically concerning amidst a pandemic. So I just have this definition up here because a lot of people question whether it's correct to really define Venezuelan migrants as refugees. And this is just from the 1984 Cartagena Declaration on Refugees, which states that refugees are persons who have fled their country because their lives, safety, or freedom have been threatened by generalized violence, foreign aggression, internal conflicts, massive violation of human rights, or other circumstances which have seriously disturbed public order. So essentially, these migrants are refugees and they should be entitled to the protections that come with that status in any country. So despite the massive scale of displacement and humanitarian need, the Venezuelan crisis is becoming one of the most underfunded in modern history. And it's currently on pace to surpass the number of refugees in Syria. So in response to the Syrian crisis, the international community contributed about 7.4 billion on refugee response efforts in the first 4 years, while funding for the Venezuelan crisis only reached 580 million. And this difference in funding happened despite both countries having a similar number of refugees in those first 4 years. In the UN's 2020 Venezuelan Humanitarian Need Overview and Humanitarian Response Plan was planning to contribute 762.5 million to reach 4.5 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, but it only received 8%, which is a very small number. So this is another thing that I think is really important to mention. And it's that apart from these refugees having to, forcefully leave their country, they also encounter or face a lot of obstacles when seeking asylum in other countries. So countries that I mentioned before, like Chile, Peru, and Ecuador, they, in order to regulate the mass migration, they're now demanding valid documentation. So documentation like passports and visas. And this is a huge challenge for migrants because obtaining and renewing passports in Venezuela is extremely expensive and it can take months due to a lack of materials. But even when these migrants are able to enter countries that don't require valid documentation or are able to enter with an irregular status, such as Colombia, because the Colombian government is being a bit more flexible in terms of restrictions upon entry. Even when they're able to enter a country like Colombia, documentation is a huge barrier. So it's a barrier to work, rent a house, or access health services and health insurance. And an example of this is the special stay permit, which was implemented in Colombia, but I know that Peru also has its own type of permit. But basically, these permits certainly help migrants integrate into society and be able to contribute to the economy. But at the same time, the downside is that they only benefit a small amount of migrants. So for example, those with an irregular status have to have proof of income. So according to the Colombian Migration Authority, only 14% of the almost 600 Venezuelans in Colombia that currently hold a special stay permit are engaged in formal employment. So this is kind of the $1 million question. When will this end? And there is really no definite answer to this. So the crisis shows no signs of slowing soon, unfortunately. The president continues to deny that there is a humanitarian crisis. And even in 2019, when Juan Guaido declared himself interim president, that kind of gave people hope that maybe with international support, they would be able to overthrow the government. This obviously has not happened, and there's been a lot of like failed attempts. So it's really not certain when the president will be removed from power. So for right now, the necessary funding and increasing awareness about the magnitude that this crisis has are crucial to ensure the protection and the security of these refugees. So these are just some donation links and other resources that inform about Venezuela. And now we can start with our discussion. These are just some questions that can get us started off, but if anyone has any other comments, they can certainly jump in.
Feel free to use the raise hand option under participants at the bottom of the Zoom screen and the chat feature as well.
Sorry, I just can't see where the, okay, participants window is. Okay, Manuel, you can go ahead.
Hi, Isabel. So has there been much change? Because I haven't actually been paying attention to this, but has there been much change in terms of the patterns of migration after Bolsonaro took over in Brazil and sort of I know that there were not the same numbers going to Brazil as were going to Spanish-speaking countries, but there were some, and I'm just wondering if there has been a change in the flow in that direction, if you know about that.
Yes, so I don't know too much about that, but I know that Bolsonaro is really not a big fan of, migration. So something that people were kind of talking about was that during COVID, they closed the borders. And a lot of people were saying that that was just an excuse for like reasons of xenophobia and discrimination because they essentially opened the airports. But they weren't letting, Venezuelan migrants cross the border. So I think obviously the patterns of migration have changed under Bolsonaro. Like I said, I don't think he's a huge fan of migration. So, yeah.
And then a follow up, just and maybe somebody else will ask this, but why do you? What's behind the relatively underfunded support for Venezuelan migrants relative to other refugee crises everywhere?
Yeah. So I didn't really find anything specific on that, but just like off of the top of my head, I guess, is that there are other, obviously humanitarian crises happening in the world, like the one in Syria and the one in South Sudan. And I think that the international community just doesn't have, enough to support all of these crises. And so I think that they start to maybe like prioritize in a way which ones have more devastation or, death toll. And I think that, crises, because the Venezuelan crisis, like I said before, isn't due to like conventional war, obviously the devastation is probably not the same. So I think that maybe this like difference in funding has to do is related to that. Okay, Oscar.
Hey Isabel. So first I just wanted to follow up on the questions that were just asked because I am a Venezuelan migrant, so I do know a little bit about the situation. So it is true that Bolsonaro does have a very hardline stance on immigration. Um, so it's not too welcoming for Venezuelans to go over there. But Bolsonaro is very popular in Venezuela. Why? Because he is more towards the right. And Venezuelans in general really don't like the government. Our government currently has like 15% approval, which means a lot of figures over on the right, including Bolsonaro, tend to be very popular around Venezuela. Um, and also that goes hand in hand with the whole humanitarian aid. When you're talking about a government that only has 15% approval, and it has a lot of ties with drugs, a lot of ties with terrorism, you have to be really careful with where you're sending money. You want to really make sure that the money's going um, to someone that can use it to make an impact and not just someone that's going to plug it right back into illegal activities. Um, but the question I really wanted to talk about is the policies that would help mitigate the long-term consequences of the crisis. So certainly there is at play that the government is doing a lot of illegal activities, but they're also making a lot of mistakes in policy. So when you talk about the socialism and what they've introduced, they nationalized the oil industry around 20 years ago. I think 1998 is when Chavez, who started the movement, was elected to power. He nationalized the oil industry. Venezuela, obviously relying on oil, we do have the largest oil reserves in the world, um, and it is a backbone of our economy. But what they essentially did is they started really tying up the oil industry with politics, and they started blacklisting people who were political opponents, and they started linking a lot of their recruitment efforts with people who were politically in favor of the Socialist Party. So they'd have like questions in their recruitment about like, do you know the five pillars of the revolution and things like that. And that's just resulted in a massive brain drain. For example, my dad, he's a petroleum engineer. He's right now in Houston. Every good petroleum engineer wants to be looking to get out of the country. So you're really hurting the talent pool there. You're really hurting the efforts of extracting oil in Venezuela. And that's pretty much what's led to our economic collapse.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for that, like direct, I guess, experience. And it's inconceivable how a country like Venezuela that's so rich in natural resources, especially oil, how mismanagement like got and corruption got the country to this state. And kind of going off of the question that we were talking about is that even after the crisis is over, obviously the new government or the new president in Venezuela is going to have to face challenges, a lot of challenges with security and the economy, and kind of helping with that like recovery. And I think the international community is going to play a huge role in that, kind of helping with that step by step recovery process. And but the consequences are kind of showing now. So the refugees are suffering now, and I think that it's really important for countries that are hosting migrants to have definite plans and policies in terms of regularization and legalization of migrants, so that they can integrate into society and have a decent quality of life, so that if when the crisis is over, and if they choose to go back to Venezuela, that that the consequences won't be so severe.
I believe John Polga had a question. No.
Hi, Thank you. I don't know how to raise my virtual hand. I apologize. I'm a moron. Isabel, thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering how you interpret the reaction of Colombia's government, given that the current president is conservative, and if that is if Colombia's attitude towards Venezuelan migrants is surprising to you or not. Thanks.
Yeah. So it is surprising, but it's not surprising at the same time. So it is true that the current president is conservative, but at the same time, in the Colombian government feels some sort of historical responsibility with Venezuela. So in the 1970s and the 1980s, there was a Venezuela oil boom. And it was actually Colombians that were crossing the border into Venezuela. And apart from, reasons of wealth, the Colombian, most of these Colombians were fleeing the violence caused by the revolutionary armed forces during that period. So the government sort of feels this historical responsibility. And something that's really interesting is that a lot of the Venezuelans that are coming back, that are coming into Colombia, are actually Colombian returnees from that period. It is surprising, but it's not surprising at the same time. Anyone else have Manuel?
I'll talk forever and nobody else does. So it's just my gift. But no, actually, there's a question that I sort of raised last year, or actually earlier this year. It just feels like an eternity ago. We had the Venezuela Focus Symposium. John was one of the participants. And one of the questions was, is there a regional strategy? Is there any dialogue amongst neighboring countries or South America or Southern Central America and parts of South America about tackling this crisis in a concerted or coordinated way? And I'm not really sure what the answer would be to that.
Yeah, so obviously from when Juan Guaido declared himself interim president, a lot of the international community supported him and kind of recognized him as the legitimate head of state. But also in terms of regional dialogue, I know there was the creation of the Lima Group or the Lima Accord, which is formed by representatives of countries in Latin America. And it was actually made to create a space to talk about the Venezuelan crisis and kind of discussing how to find a solution to this or to the crisis. And they have also denounced, like the UN did, they have also denounced President Maduro with human rights abuses. So I think there is definitely regional cooperation and dialogue, but there still needs to be a lot more of this cooperation.
Isabel, if I may, to talk a little bit with Manuel a little bit about that. My family is Venezuelan and most of my family still lives in Venezuela. So I get kind of updates every week when I talk to my grandparents, cousins, whatever it is. And I think the problem with the discussions as well is even if Guaido gets involved, I mean, they know it. My parents, they talk to their parents every day. Guaido really, he pronounced himself the president, but he doesn't really have any power, unfortunately. So it's kind of like, you have the title, but you don't have any of the money or the army, which is right now down there, it's huge. And that's what basically makes everyone do everything. So that's the tough part of how can we get help to them? I know my family, we send stuff to our family as often as we can, like boxes with food and stuff, but they say it all gets picked through. So it's like when we're talking about money sent to the country, is it going to fall into the wrong hands? Probably. Discussions about how can we help them and the migrants and stuff. It's just tough with Guaido not actually having the power to be, to really find a solid solution to that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, like I said before, when he declared himself interim president, a lot of people had hope that he would be able to like overthrow the government. But in these years, it has not been possible, even though he has so much international support. So that's also kind of what's shocking, is that that after all this support and after all the things that he has done, really there have been no results, and that's why it's so complex, because countries are still debating how to tackle this problem, because a lot of countries say that intervention is the best way, but then there are organizations like the European Union that say that intervention is not the way to go, and that that there should be a democratic and peaceful transition of power. So yeah, I definitely know that it's very frustrating to not see results after all of this. Luz?
Hi, my question is more about within Colombia, because when I was there, you can see even people within Colombia, anything that goes wrong in Colombia, they blame Venezuela or the people from Venezuela. Is there any laws or any programs that have been created? I know outside Medellin, they were doing things to help people get jobs, help them, train them. But is there anything else going like around the country, not just specific communities? Or how is Colombia handling that, like more on a personal level? Because I noticed people were very anti-Venezuelan, so if something happened, it was them. So how is Colombia handling that, or anyone else has any opinion on that too? So
yeah, so in Colombia, you can really like see how much xenophobia and discrimination there is against Venezuelans. So I know last year during the protests in Colombia, a lot of Venezuelans were deported because they were, linked to the vandalism that happened during the protests, but that same vandalism was done by, natives. So, and even like now, the mayor of Colombia has said that a lot of Venezuelans are like linked to crime, and that they're, just here for crime and violence. So there's definitely a lot of xenophobia. But I do know that a lot of people have been kind of debating or arguing against this xenophobia. And I think there's actually like a charitable foundation or an organization, I think it's called Somos Pana. And it kind of is like, its objective is to go against this like mentality of xenophobia and discrimination. Caden?
Hi, Isabel. I have a question about Maduro's allies. Are they acknowledging that these humanitarian crises and abuses of agency are actually occurring? Are they providing assistance? I'm very unfamiliar with this issue, so I was wondering if you'd give me a little insight about that.
Yeah, so they're definitely aware of what Maduro is doing. So if you think about the allies that he has, such as like Russia and Cuba, they have very similar political like ideologies, so like socialist ideologies. And that means that they also have common enemies, so like the US. But not only this, they have mutual interests. So for example, in the case of Cuba, Cuba has always like depended on Venezuela for its oil. And in the Chavez era, actually, they would like sell oil at very cheap prices. So yeah, Cuba has always, depended on Venezuela. But at the same time, like in return, Cuba kind of assists Venezuela with military equipment and like military strategy. So that's also something they kind of have like mutual interests, and that's kind of contributing to the repression that Maduro is carrying out. Sophia.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to go back and comment on something that Luz said and that you commented on about like Colombians' attitude toward Venezuelans. I think it's really interesting. And it made me think that it's also partly a class thing, an issue, because it's a lot easier for a Venezuelan who is more wealthy to go and establish themselves in Colombia. And I'm an English teacher for Colombian students. So, but one of my students was actually Venezuelan, and she was living in Colombia, and she's a doctor, she's an anesthesiologist. And I asked her like, hey, like, how has your experience been as a Venezuelan in Colombia? And she's like, well, a lot of other Venezuelans get a lot of discrimination, but since I'm a doctor, I was able to find a job really easily, and I haven't faced a lot of that like my other country folk have faced. So I just think that thinking of the class issue too is super interesting and like super relevant. So yeah, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And that kind of goes back to, what I was talking about with the obstacles with documentation. So, a lot of people have, like, the people that don't have the required documentation, and that's usually people from, like lower classes, have difficulty in accessing or being able to have formal employment. So a lot of them that don't have these permits are left to, work in the informal sector. So yeah, that's definitely something that's really interesting. Joyce?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I wanted to follow up with what Sophia and Luz were both saying. I think in addition to classism, there's also a lot of racism involved. In spring 2019, I studied abroad in Ecuador for the whole semester, and I got to visit Peru for 2 or 3 weeks. And in Ecuador, there's a lot of discrimination. It's horrible. And it was the reason I actually ended up deciding to switch from studying history to studying international affairs. So that's how I'm in Gispia right now, just because I've never seen anything like it. And I just wanted to share a few experiences of what I saw. So I think Sophia was talking about, or maybe it might have been Luce, who was talking about protests in Colombia. And in Ecuador, I think it was my 2nd or 3rd week in Ecuador, this Venezuelan man stabbed his pregnant Ecuadorian girlfriend on the streets, like in front of the police, and nobody did anything. But suddenly it was like every Venezuelan's fault, like that existed in Ecuador. And there were these massive protests, and they got a little violent, and we were told to stay far away. And it was in northern Ecuador, and we weren't allowed in northern Ecuador just because it was too dangerous. So, but that was one thing that I saw, that every time a Venezuelan individual did something wrong, quote unquote wrong, that every Venezuelan, every like man, woman, and child was blamed immediately for it. And even my host family, they were from the beginning, they told me to stay away from Venezuelans. And I think in Ecuador, I picked this up pretty quickly, that Ecuador has a lot of poverty. I don't think it's the poorest country, but there definitely is a lot of poverty that I saw in Quito. And if that individual was brown, not white passing, if they were brown and they were obviously like working in the streets or like begging for money, we were like, apparently we were automatically to assume that they were Venezuelan, and they were just looked so down upon. And it was just awful. Like I remember I was in one of the indigenous markets, and there was this Venezuelan woman with an infant, like a teeny tiny little baby, just sitting on the floor and begging for money. And like when I went to Peru, so apparently if you're from Venezuela and you want to enter Peru, you have to have a specific vaccine. And a lot of people, I took I made the horrific mistake of taking a 40-hour bus down from Quito to Lima, and that was like the worst thing ever. But there were a lot of Venezuelans on our bus, and we did a land crossing. We had to go through security, migration, whatever. And I looked around, and I was like half asleep because I was on these sleeping pills so that I wouldn't like suffer through the trip. But I was looking around, and I saw all these people, like mostly women and children, laying on the floor with like luggage. And in the moment, I didn't really understand what was going on. But when we were leaving, I was talking to somebody on the bus, and they were like, those were Venezuelans. They couldn't get into the country. And like they had to wait for a vaccine, but I think it was a yellow fever vaccine actually. And like at the border, like it's very limited. Like you have to, I think only like a very few number of individuals are able to access that vaccine and get into Venezuela. So they're literally just like stuck there, I don't know, for an indefinite amount of time. But back to the discrimination. Yeah, no, it was awful. A lot of Ecuadorians, they just hate Venezuelans, and they would justify it by saying that Ecuador is already a poor country. They're already suffering economically, and Ecuador just can't handle Venezuelans, and they should. It's kind of like the rhetoric in the US, like it parallels, like go back to your country, like, it's not our problem. And so it was very, very sad. And I've just never seen anything like it. And it's just always stuck with me. Even after coming back to the US, I've just never been able to forget about what I saw. And yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that comment. And yeah, it's definitely very upsetting and frustrating to know that ever since Venezuelan migration started, that the only thing that it's been linked to is crime and violence and all these like negative like factors. And this is definitely one of the biggest, problems that countries in Latin America are going to be facing, and things that are going to be put up for discussion and for debate in countries. So yeah, thank you. Manuel?
And I wanted to let John's had his hand up, his actual hand, not his virtual hand, up for a bit. So I just wanted to give him a chance. And then I have a follow-up question as well.
Thank you, Manuel. Everyone else is asking questions, so I just thought I would be quiet. I was wondering how you have interpreted the effects of COVID on all of this, because I'm married to a Venezuelan. I study Venezuela. My wife's family lives in San Cristobal. I got married on the border, and the border's closed, and my family can't even take the trochas to go shopping in Cucuta. And so when that's the case, life is a whole lot harder for those Venezuelans in Zulia and Táchira and such. Yeah. Also, COVID meant that a lot of migrants in Colombia had to go back to Venezuela, and on returning, they've like faced double xenophobia, because in Venezuela now they're seen as the migrants who brought back COVID with them. Mm-hmm. And they still don't have jobs, and it's obviously a much tougher situation for them. How do you see this playing out in the future? Have things changed in Colombia during the past 7 months? And will this change again once, I guess, there is a vaccine at some point, hopefully in human history?
Yeah, so definitely I think because of COVID, the problem of migration has become like more complex in all aspects. And one of the things that you kind of touched upon was that even though the countries, were forced to close their borders, this doesn't mean that migration is stopping, So a lot of them, because they're desperate to leave their country, look for alternatives. And those alternatives are through like routes, like illegal routes. And through those illegal routes, like it's very dangerous. So a lot of them have even, like died on the way, or they encounter violence. They're recruited by like criminal groups, or people take advantage of their situation and their vulnerability to kind of, steal the like few personal items that they have. So it's definitely become more complex because of COVID. And I think that when they open borders again, I just think that it'll probably be the same, or there'll even be more like migration towards Colombia, because like you said, a lot of people had to go back, but obviously that's not where they want to be.
Alex had something to say. I don't know if you wanted to jump in, Alex.
But wait, I just had that follow-up comment, which goes back to the discrimination piece, and it just put it in your a feather in your hat. You know, something to think about. When I worked in Guyana, and I saw lots of Venezuelans coming into Guyana, even though they didn't speak English, they were lighter skinned on the whole than the Guyanans, and you know, they were discriminated against there. So it's a matter of othering more at this point. It's not. I don't think it matters what sort of color, skin as much. It does matter. It does matter. It has a dimension. It has added complexity. But I think for Venezuelans, it's just the stigma of having to sort of drag their whole families with whatever belongings they can under their arms to wherever they find safe harbor. And I think that doesn't speak well of the human condition, you know, when you look down upon somebody who needs our help. And that's just an editorial comment.
Thank you. Was Alex going to say something?
Yeah. So first, thank you for your presentation and your article. I read it a couple of days ago. They were great. And thanks for choosing this topic, because I definitely think it's important to bring awareness to it. I've talked to a lot of people and they might have heard of Venezuela, but sometimes they don't have a clue of what's going on. So I thought your article was really good. And I was just going to comment on discrimination again. I think someone already brought it up before, but I just wanted to say that even friends of mine that I know that have migrated have experienced this, and regardless of skin tone or social class, all of them have experienced it. You touched already on that before, but I just wanted to comment it again.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And I think it's super important to like bring awareness to people about the magnitude of this crisis, because a lot of people, you know, you hear about the Syrian crisis, but because the crisis in Venezuela is not due to war, I think a lot of people like aren't aware of its magnitude and how it's really affecting these migrants and you know, Venezuelan society and citizens. So yeah, thank you. Oscar?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the question about coronavirus. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about my aunt's experience. She is a doctor over there in Maracaibo in Zulia State. And it's a huge issue because the entire country only has 82 ICU beds. So there's really not a lot of supplies. And besides that, 50% of doctors have left the country in the past 5 years. So you're talking about a very untalented group of individuals. Of course, my aunt is still there. She's a very talented person, but just in general. And they also don't have a lot of access to masks, which at this point in the US are readily available. So those things we take for granted here, over there, it's not something that's completely widespread. And also my uncle, he's also a doctor, and he has diabetes. So he has, so for him, having that pre-existing condition, it's a huge worry. And when he gets his masks, the problem is he wants to give some to his family. We tell him, no, don't do that. But really, like, these are the issues that people are facing over there. Like, how do you distribute your mask? It's not something that you can take for granted, like you can do here.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And that, you know, kind of goes back to that idea of how like the international community might not be giving it the attention it needs. Because you would think that in these places where, you know, there is a lack of masks, especially like during a pandemic, that they would kind of step up to help these, you know, marginalized groups and vulnerable groups. But, that's unfortunately not the case. So thank you. Juan?
Yeah, I just have a question from looking at it from an economic perspective. If Colombia is such a struggling it's a country that struggles financially to support its own residents and the nation as a whole, what are they doing to accommodate the mass immigration from of Venezuelans into their country? Because if they can't really deal with their own problems, how are they what are they doing to help those Venezuelans that do go in to the country itself?
Yeah, so I think that makes it, that's why it's kind of surprising why Colombia has been, more open to accept migrants, because the situation makes it so much more complex for Colombia that already has its own share of, problems. But I think that from the relatively, small amount of funding that the international community gives it, it does make a big difference in, contributing to helping these migrants. And also there are just, other charitable foundations and organizations in Colombia that are receiving, help from elsewhere.
Thank you.
Hi, Isabel. First of all, thank you for this great presentation. It's really informative, and I think that you're bringing attention to a really important issue. I wanted to ask a little bit about the democratic transition. Specifically, I wanted to ask you, so the State Department, the U.S. State Department, over the summer, they released a plan that they called the Democratic Transition Framework. And I can send what I'm quoting here, but they say that, quote, they want to both Maduro and Guaido to step aside so that the elected members of the National Assembly from both sides can create a council of state to serve as a transitional government, which would hold free and fair presidential elections. So I wanted to ask if you think that something like that plan of having both Maduro and Guaido step aside and have the National Assembly sort of take over the transition would be an effective strategy, and also if you think that the international community should be playing a role in this democratic transition.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. I think it's, the best strategy going forward. And it's probably the ideal plan for it to have a democratic transition. But at the same time, I think it's a bit more complex than that, because in order for that to work, the government and Maduro have to be, willing to negotiate. And I think I read, when I was researching, that in many instances when the opposition was trying to negotiate with Maduro, they kind of introduced a similar framework to that of the US, the one that the US introduced, and he rejected it. So I think that it's definitely the an ideal plan and maybe even the best strategy, but at the same time, it will only work if the government is willing to negotiate. Manuel?
Just another little bit about the discrimination across the borders and how this relates also in terms of economic opportunity. I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Isabel, and maybe those of you who have more familiarity with the situation in Colombia, but there's also this thing about migrants making and creating small enterprises and economic opportunities and actually expanding economies. And though it's a hard shock at first, in the longer midterm and long run, it turns out to be beneficial for the receiving countries to have the migrants, which is totally opposite to what we hear about how we should welcome or not welcome migrants. And so, for example, in Panama, I remember a few years back when I was working there, there were 70,000 Venezuelans that had arrived already in Panama at that point. And they were taking up all sorts of technical and technified profession posts from Panamanians, and they were resentful. These people did not come across on foot. A lot of these people were highly trained and professionals from Venezuela. And something similar has happened all over, where you have Venezuelans with, in Colombia, I know the musicians are really worried because lots of great Venezuelan musicians have crossed, the musical education in Venezuela has been a great tradition for decades. And they're taking, they're adding, I guess, to the skilled labor force that would provide musical entertainment and actually positions in, playing music. And so there's all of that subtlety, right, in the middle of this migration, where it's not just this homogeneous group crossing borders, even though that is most of the people, that are in terrible economic need.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because I think I read somewhere that the Venezuelan migrants that are crossing over into these countries, the majority are a very young population and they're highly skilled. So, they can contribute a lot to these countries' economies. But I think that one of the things that is impeding that is kind of this mentality of, natives thinking that they're going to steal jobs and just discrimination overall. So yeah, I think that's really interesting as well. Maria?
Hi, thanks for having this conversation. I feel like it's also really important. But going back to the comment before, do you think that Venezuela can realistically go through a democratical, quote unquote, change? I feel like we like to think that that's going to happen. And I'm Venezuelan, and as me, there are many of us that has lost hope, I guess, have given up to that potentially happen. Like Guaidó is something that's not new. We have had many Guaidós in the last 20 years. You can call it however you want, from when I was a kid, when Rosales was even trying to get into the government. This is not, Guaidó is something that's not new for many of us. So do you think that they can realistically, Maduro will be yes, I want to negotiate. Yes, I gonna give up the government and the empire that I have built through drugs and corruption and all this. Now my question is then what's the alternative? If the international pressure is not working, if these negotiations are not gonna happen, what do we do?
Yeah. So I think that's a really, complex question to have an answer, a definite answer to. But I do think that international pressure, so one of the reasons why Maduro hasn't, wanted to negotiate is also because of the factor of the sanctions that the US has imposed. So realistically, I think that negotiations are, the only way, because an intervention is, off the table. So I think that realistically it could be, feasible, but at the same time, it's really important, for these, it's they still need to, discuss this a lot because it takes time, because like you said, the government and Maduro is not just gonna negotiate right away. So there obviously has to be both sides are going to lose something, in the end. And I think we have time for a couple more questions. Luz?
No, lo mío, my comment is about, I saw a show in Colombia. I was there for Christmas, I think. And it was about a bus that leaves from Venezuela. And it was full of, like you say, young people, skilled. Some were artists, some were, and they took the bus and they went through Colombia. And as they went through Colombia, some people stay in Colombia. Then they went to Ecuador. Some people stay in Ecuador. Then they went to Peru, and the last country was Chile. So then they went back and followed to see what they were doing. And the people that have relatives, like you were speaking before, of some of you, the family helped them set up business, even in Colombia. The people that got to Chile they were servers. They left their families. They haven't seen most of their they haven't seen their kid. It was very sad, and it was kind of hard to watch it because I'm here, so I know what happens with people coming from Mexico or Central America. But in Colombia, some of the people they were kind of skeptical about it, but at the same time, we cry. And if anyone knows what program was it, or if there's a documentary about it, it's one of the greatest things to see, because they went back 6 months and a year later to see how they were doing. And it was a beautiful thing to see, and a very sad thing because it was very real. And I think in Colombia, because most Colombians also are in need, it's really hard for them to see the need of someone else. But at the same time, there's people trying to help them. So that was just if anyone knows of this program or have seen it, or can, see if you can find it, it's one of the greatest things to see. And there was a whole series about it. So I just want to make that comment.
Okay. Thank you. I'll definitely take note of that. Joyce?
Hi again. I have a question, and I hope it's not too controversial. I'm saying this from as non-biased as I can be. So I'm sure a lot of us know that the U.S. has a history of intervention in Latin America. I think probably in every Latin American country ever. And so I was wondering, when I was in Ecuador, I hated public transportation because every bad thing that ever happened to me was on a bus. So I would just take a lot of Ubers, and I actually had a surprising amount of Venezuelan Uber drivers, and we would talk all the time. They were always interested to know about my opinion of Trump and the wall, and they always talked about how they wanted the US's help in taking down Maduro. But at the same time, I have a lot of friends in the US who are very progressive, left-leaning, and they say that the US this is another example of the US intervening in a country where they shouldn't be intervening. And they're saying that, or they believe that the US is twisting around Maduro's image, and he's not as bad as the media is saying he is. And I was wondering what your opinion is on that, if you think the US is twisting him around. I mean, I know I have my opinions on Maduro, but I was just wondering what you think about US involvement, specifically the US involvement in Venezuela with their history of intervention.
Yeah. So a lot of people, doubt the intentions of the US in kind of wanting Maduro to be overthrown, because a lot of people, so the US claims that it's for, democratic reasons. But a lot of people say that the intentions might actually be economic, because Venezuela has so much oil reserves. And I think that, the US actually tried a small intervention, I guess, but it was stopped by Maduro's military. So I think that shows that, intervention is kind of, it's very difficult to use as a way to kind of overthrow the government or have this transition. But yeah, going back to the US intervention overall, it's kind of questioned their intentions in wanting to do this. And then just for the last question, Oscar.
Yeah, so I think just going back to that question about the US's involvement in the issue, my position on it is that a President Trump and what he was planning to do and the intervention, he did seem pretty aggressive on there. I'm not sure if he had the best ideas for Venezuela, but going back to the past and the sanctions, for me, it's pretty clear that they were made because our government is a narco state. they were forging passports for terrorists from Iran. And that is the view that the people of Venezuela hold, even within the propaganda, even within all the efforts of the state to convince us otherwise. That is the view that the people in our country hold, that the government really is at the root of this issue, and they really deserve what has come their way in the way of sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when we look forward, and I think Maria brought up a really good point about how Guaido isn't the best leader. He's not anything really special. For me, what's important about Guaido's claim is the fact that it's the constitutional claim, and he really is the rightful president. Maduro has never won a free and fair election. So for me, it's really important that we support Guaido's claim to power as the president of the National Assembly. Like he is the highest elected official in the nation, and that also makes him president. So for me, in the going forward, I think that's really important, and I don't quite agree with that U.S. statement that he should step aside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, for a lot of Venezuelans, Juan Guaido kind of represents that resistance, that resistance of the masses or the people in Venezuela. So, it's still up for debate whether, he should step aside and kind of let another government rule. But yeah. Thank you for that comment. And I think that we're out of time. So thank you so much for being here and for everyone's comments.
Thank you so much to Isabel and to those of you who shared your personal experiences, to those of you who came. We're really fortunate that we're able to facilitate this dialogue about a really tragic situation. A quick announcement, our next and last roundtable of the semester will be on the Black Lives Matter movement in Latin America and the Caribbean on November 20th at 4:15 p.m. You can stay up to date with updates from that and the article that will be posted soon through our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our newsletter. Again, a special thank you to Isabel for leading a wonderful discussion, and look forward to seeing you all again in a couple weeks. Have a great rest of your weekend.
If anyone else needs to scan the...
Oh, yeah.
Can do so here.